Hello and welcome to the next painting guide for the Balin's tomb diorama. At the end of the last video where we painted, I asked you fine folks who your favorite member of the fellowship is and why. And based on the comments I've chosen the next mini to paint, Boromir. Because as Doran05 said, he's the most human, the most relatable. He's strong, loyal and determined to protect his people. Also, he's easily manipulated, proud and desperate to get home. I have to say, I agree. When I watched The Fellowship of the Ring for the first time, I thought Boromir was such a bad guy. But as I watched it again and again as I got older, I realized he's actually an amazing man. And when rewatching the Amon Hen scene to get inspiration for painting him, I couldn't help tearing up again, even though I must have watched the movie close to 100 times by now. It's quite astonishing. So if you're excited to see Denethor's favorite get painted up, why don't you grab your bow and fire some arrows into the like button. It's time to get on with the painting. I started Boromir off the way I start all my minis off, and that's with an Army Painter matte black primer, followed by an all-over layer of Vallejo black to cover any spots the primer might have missed, and because the primer comes off very shiny on camera. The first object we're going to tackle on Boromir is his jacket, for which I found it hard to identify the exact color. From pictures I found online of other people painting him, it seems many chose to go for grey, which I think is fairly close, but when looking at reference pictures and watching the movie itself, it seems to me there's a bit of blue hidden in that grey, so that's how I chose to paint it. Honestly, from a distance the end result could still easily be seen as just grey, but you and I know there's blue in there, and I think the fact that it's hard to find is a good representation of how it looks in the movies too. So with that in mind, I started off with a mixture of 5 parts black to 1 part grey-blue, a very desaturated paint, which I'm a huge fan of personally. I then slowly layered my way up using a little less black and a little more grey-blue each time. After 3 layers of that, I switched my blue paint to French Mirage Blue, which is actually a darker color than grey-blue, which might seem odd when we're trying to get brighter with each layer, but since the first few layers used so little grey-blue, we were able to use a bit more French Mirage Blue compared to black in these final layers, to get a bit more blue in the mini without going too bright, which we don't want as the jacket is very dark anyway. I also once again show off a little bit of black lining, which I will do after finishing each part of the model, but won't show each time as it's the same every time. It's a way to add some shadows without using washes, but I'll make a video focusing on this topic in the future. With those colors on, the jacket is almost done except for the lining, for which we're going to continue to use black and French Mirage Blue, but with even more French Mirage Blue than before as the lining is visibly brighter than the rest of the jacket, starting with 1 part black to 3 parts French Mirage Blue. Then adding another part French Mirage Blue to get 4 parts to 1 part black. And finally another part French Mirage Blue to finish on a 5:1 ratio. With the jacket done, we move on to Boromir's dress? If anyone's got a better name for that piece of clothing, please do let me know. For his dress, we've gone with a mixture of 2 parts black to 1 part burnt red as a base layer. We built on this base layer with a little bit more burnt red, changing the ratio to 1:1. Another layer is added with once again a bit more burnt red, but still maintaining some black. And a final highlight of pure burnt red is then added to finish the red parts of the dress. Boromir's dress of course has some very obvious yellowish patterns though, so I've decided to attempt to replicate these somewhat. I say yellowish because it seems to be somewhere between yellow, gold and khaki, so I decided to start with a layer of Steel Legion drab, followed by a layer of Talarn sand, and ending on a layer of Xandri dust. I tried to follow the pattern of the actual clothing as closely as possible with my limited painting skills and a scale like this, but I think the end result is admirable. What I essentially did was paint a full circle around the end of the sleeve, and then paint a triangle towards the torso every few millimeters. After that I painted a load of very small dots in a mostly uniform pattern. This required a bit of patience and a fine tip of your brush, but it's absolutely doable. Next up was the padding. In the video you can see I actually already partially painted the bracers, but I later realized this was a bad move, as something that I thought was part of the bracers was actually the padding below. So I recommend starting with the padding and thus will show it as such in the video. For the padding, we once again take out our oh so popular black paint and mix in a little Mournfang brown as a base layer. For the second layer, we add a bit more Mournfang brown to the mixture for a 2-to-1 mixture in favor of Mournfang brown. And as a final highlight, we throw on a layer of pure Mournfang brown. So once you finish the padding, it's much easier to paint the bracers, as you don't have to worry so much about ruining parts you've already painted. The bracers are a dark grey, and thus it won't surprise you we're throwing some black onto our palette once again, 2 parts of it to be exact, and mix it with 1 part Skavenblight Dinge. Make sure you paint the little straps that hold the bracers in place as well, as these are the same color. The second layer adds a bit more Skavenblight Dinge to the mix. For the third layer, we finally dump the black, but don't worry, we'll see it again soon, to add a layer of pure Skavenblight Dinge. And finally a layer of Skavenblight Dinge mixed 1-to-1 with Storm Vermin Fur to finish the bracers off. Next up are the favorite Son of Gondor's gloves and boots, for which we once again need some black. Look, it's not my fault he's got so many dark pieces of clothing. To mix things up though, get it? We throw in a brighter color as well, Screaming Skull, but only a little bit, 1 part to be exact to 5 parts black. I find that these colors together give a nice leathery black/grey look. For the other 2 layers we use the same colors, adding a bit more Screaming Skull each time. Next up is the skin, which I paint using the same colors and techniques as in the Frodo video. 1 part flat earth, 1 part flat brown, and a part white to start things off. Then adding a bit more white with each layer, focusing on stronger features of the skin. In this case it's only Boromir's face, so the brighter highlights will focus just on his nose, cheekbones and jawline. I think it would be a good idea to make a video dedicated to my recipes for skin tones at some point in the future as well, so I can just refer to that for details on how I paint skin. Also make sure to repaint any parts of the hair you might have accidentally painted with skin color back to black, as that is what we will cover next. I also painted the eyes in off camera, as I can't work out a good angle for showcasing painting eyes yet, but again, something for a future video. As I just said, Boromir's hair is next. His hair is actually fairly light, especially compared to most other members of the Fellowship, but we will still start off with a darker color as a base layer, this being our favorite color from the video, German Camo Black Brown. I also always make sure to paint eyebrows, as I find it a bit weird looking when minis don't have them. For the second layer we use pure burnt umber, but starting to focus more on the individual strands of hair rather than covering everything. And for the final layer we add some white to the burnt umber and focus even more on the individual strands, especially at the top of his head as well as the lower part. Whilst we're in the process of painting browns, let's stick to that and get all of Boromir's straps and belts out of the way. These being the strap that goes around his chest holding his shield, the belt that goes around his waist and falls down in front of his right leg, and also his sword scabbard, but avoiding the little straps on the scabbard as we will paint those a different color later. The first layer on all of these things is Dryad Bark, which we then follow up with a layer of Dryad Bark mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio with Steel Legion Drab. After these layers have dried, we continue with a layer of pure Steel Legion Drab, now starting to focus on the higher points of the letter, where the sun would catch it. And finally a layer of Steel Legion Drab mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio with Talarn Sand, focusing even more on the top parts. With the letter done, we can now paint the straps on his scabbard with 2 simple layers, the first being Steel Legion Drab and the second being Carrick Stone. These are the same colors I used for the straps on Frodo, so we get a little bit of uniformity across the minis as well. Next up is the famed
The Horn of Gondor.
Thank you, Legolas. The Horn of Gondor indeed. The horn is mostly a light color with a little bit of dark towards the tip, but we will start with the lighter color, painting this with Rakhar flesh. As we paint this, we already try to leave a bit of the darker part of the horn black for later. We follow the brighter part up with a layer of Rakhar flesh mixed with pallid witch flesh. And finally a layer of pure pallid witch flesh. The darker part of the horn is a lot simpler. We still have the black on there from the start, and to give it a tiny bit of depth we just use one of the layers from earlier when painting the gloves and boots, black mixed with Screaming Skull. We've arrived at Boromir's iconic round shield that he so desperately needed at Amon Hen. We started off with a layer of Rhinox hide over the whole thing. Don't forget to paint the front, back? The other side of the shield as well. It's so well hidden in the shadows that I decided it doesn't need a lot of work, and painting wood grain on it when it's so difficult to see isn't really worth it, so a dark brown like Rhinox hide is good enough for that side. We then mix in some Doombull brown with the Rhinox hide in a 1:1 ratio and paint about 80% of the shield from the top down. This will give a nice illusion of the sun hitting it from above. The next layer is pure Doombull brown, with which you only paint about 60% of the shield from the top down. And finally a layer of Doombull brown mixed with Tuscarora fur, with which we only paint the top 40% of the shield. Boromir is starting to look pretty close to being finished, except for all the metal parts, some of which will be painted gold and some of which will be painted silver. As I said in the previous video, this is definitely a topic to go into detail on in another video, as non-metallic metal isn't something easily shown or described. I'm also still somewhat of a novice myself when it comes to non-metallic metal, so my methods are absolutely not the best or the prettiest, but the more you try it, the better you get, so that's what I'm currently doing as well. Once I feel confident in my abilities, I will absolutely make videos going into detail on non-metallic metal. In a nutshell though, you blend from dark to light, the bigger the contrast, the more realistic it will look, keeping in mind where the sun would naturally hit the model as well, making those parts brighter than the parts in the shadows. The same goes for the silver metallic parts, but in this video I actually tried to show you it a bit more clearly by using the boss on Boromir's shield as an example, as you will see it change each time I go brighter. With the metals all done, you can see what Boromir looks like in his pre-varnish state. But because I love a matte varnish, and because these models need protection from our nasty little fingers, I covered a superior brother in a double varnish using ultra matte varnish by AK Interactive. To finish Boromir off, I put him on a base similar to Frodo's to suit the Balin tomb diorama and call him done. I will make a video showcasing how I made these and many other bases in future videos as well. And that will do it for the legend that is Boromir. I think since he so valiantly fought until his last breath to protect Merry and Pippin, it's only fair to paint one of them next. So please let me know in the comments which of the two hobbits I should paint next and why. Is it because everyone knows Merry is the tall one, or because Pippin is a fool of a took? Let me know in the comments and maybe you'll be the one to decide who's getting some color splashed on next. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to let me know by leaving a like and subscribing if you want to see more. Maybe tell your less favorite brother about this tutorial so they can regain some honor. Thank you very much for watching and have an amazing day.